Hello, thank you very much for purchasing this. A show that we'll just call Stewart Lee and Robin Ince kind of bang on about Italian westerns for a while, but not the really famous ones like Fistful of Dollars and My Name is Nobody. That's quite a catchy title, I think. Anyway, we had a great afternoon talking about these films. This has been it's been on the shelf for a while. Stewart Lee and I, with our director Trent Burton, sat down for an afternoon and talked about Italian westerns, and we loved it, and it was very, very exciting as well, because Stewart is tremendously enthusiastic about Italian westerns, and in particular not the famous Italian westerns. And we should also mention that all of the films that you hear about are currently available on Arrow DVD. We had a great afternoon talking about these films, because these films are not just the run-of-the-mill westerns. In fact, even by the standards of some of the more famous spaghetti westerns you might know, there's a real uncanny quality to a couple of these. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and I'm so pleased that you decided to purchase it, because all of the money from this particular project that we've done is going towards a friend of ours who is currently got various health battles on, and so all of the money is going towards funding them and what they're facing at the moment. So thank you for your donation. Also, I should mention that there's loads of other projects that we make at cosmicshambles.com, as well as science documentaries and book documentaries, and also our series An Uncanny Hour, where we've talked about things like Hawkwind in the 1970s, David Cronenberg's The Brood, John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, and Derek Jarman's Jubilee, as well as the Ealing classic Dead of Night, but much more than that. And if you would like to hear that and find out about more of our work, then it will be wonderful if you can support us. Patreon.com/CosmicShambles. Anyway, enough of my yakking. Here's Stewart Lee.
How are you going to start this?
That's how it started.
You start talking like that?
Yeah.
This has started.
This has started.
It was better the way you started it before, when the air
we can
conditioning
still
was still
talk
on.
about Dead Man's Shoes as well. Hi, welcome to... No, fuck
Don't do that.
No, we're not doing any of that. But no, so did you watch Dead Man's Shoes last night?
I watched Dead Man's Shoes last night. I mean, I should probably have watched, given that what we're talking about is this box set of revenge westerns, I should probably have watched another 1960s Italian revenge western. But I started thinking about how Dead Man's Shoes is a revenge western, and watching it again, having spent the previous 2 weeks watching 60s Italian revenge westerns, it just totally is. It sets out its stall really early on, doesn't it?
And it's got that thing. I mean, I suppose it's more. I mean, that almost opening line when Paddy Considine's talking to Toby Kebbell, playing his brother, and he says, "God will forgive them. He will forgive them, and he will allow them into heaven, and I cannot live with that." And that, as an opening manifesto of revenge. And each time I watch it, I think this is more of a revenge western than it was last time.
Well, I wonder if, did they sit down and when they were making Dead Man's Shoes, and did they think about, how it's... did Shane Meadows and Considine think about it as an Italian revenge western, or is it sort of in our subconscious without us knowing, because it's such it's a form that has leaked out into cinema generally, and also it obviously has relationships with older sorts of stories. Loads of the films we're going to talk about, for example, have a connection to the Oedipus story, where he comes home to Ithaca, finds that his lands have been stolen by someone else, and they're trying to get off with his wife, and then he has to kind of go undercover and take everyone out one by one to get them back. About 3 of these 4 films basically have that format. I got obsessed with Italian westerns about 15 years ago. I was particularly despondent at one period. My wife went, "What's your problem?" And I went, "I'm not sort of interested in anything at the moment." And she said, "Well, what have you always wanted to know about? What did you used to like?" And I said, "Well, when I was a teenager, I really liked Italian westerns." And she said, "Well, why don't you..." So she brought me this book. And of course, what's happened since 1985 is hundreds of them are available, in a way that they just weren't. I remember wanting to see... I loved Once Upon a Time in the West, and I'd read somewhere that there was a version of it that was in the rest of the world that was a third longer than the one we saw on British telly. And I went to Paris when I was 18 to see it in a late night cinema, the full 3.5 hour version of it, which was just fantastic. And actually Alex Cox, who wrote this great book about Italian westerns, 10,000 Ways to Die, he talks about doing the same thing in the 70s, going to Paris where, because the French were the first people to realise that the Italian westerns were an art form rather than junk, and they kept them in rep at these cinemas, and he went and saw loads that you couldn't see here. I mean, a lot of which were banned. We just thought of as impossibly indefensibly violent. So I think it's in the subconscious, I think.
But when we were growing up, as far as I remember, because there is something about the comical nature of the way that because all we would have seen, I think, is we would have seen Good, the Bad, and the Ugly for a few dollars more and Fistful of Dollars.
Yeah.
Maybe My Name Is Nobody.
Yeah.
All of them in quite bad versions, and a lot of the pan and scan stuff.
Yeah, absolutely ruined in that way as well, which people cannot believe. Now that everyone's got a cinema-shaped telly, you can't believe how these beautifully composed 60s and 70s films, the camera used to go. In fact, there was a Benny Hill sketch about it. I remember there was a Benny Hill sketch which was about a western being panned and scanned and moving across, and the TV shape missing loads of the action because of where it had chosen to focus in. And that's one of the things that's great about the Arrow restored versions of these westerns and the Koch versions that the German company Koch, K-O-C-H, do, is that you're seeing them as they're meant to be seen, whereas loads of them are knocking about on Amazon Prime, and you think, great, and actually what you're seeing is it's really low quality, it's been crunched into a TV shape. And these were things that were composed, not always by geniuses, but at their very worst by brilliant hacks. Who really knew what they were doing,
See, is this true? That I remember reading once that the reason there was so much laughter in some of the Sergio Leone films was actually because when they got to doing the dubbing and stuff like that, they go, oh, this line's just too long.
Yeah.
And so they would cut the line down to the sparsest thing, and then while the mouth was opening and closing, just have ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
And I was watching some of these, and I'm not sure, because there's a lot of laughter. For instance, Bandidos starts off with a lot of evil, crazed, we're going to kill everyone cackling.
Yeah. It's entirely possible. I mean, if actually a direct address to viewer, if anyone who's not watched loads of Italian westerns, and there must be some of you, that suddenly decide you want to after this, there's only one way to watch them really, which is watch them in the original Italian dub with English subtitles. Because otherwise you enter a nightmare world of some of the English language dubs are really changed to try to suit particular markets, and you get as close to the director's intention if you watch the Italian dub with English subtitles. And you really notice this in the version of Django that's doing the rounds, where the English dub completely changes the character of the lead character in Corbucci's Django, which sort of defined the genre in loads of ways. He changes him into a sort of nihilist who hates everyone, whereas there's a kind of defeated nobility about him in the English translation of the Italian dialogue. So it's worth trying to do that.
Well, it is, because I think this is the first time that I've properly watched Italian westerns not dubbed.
Yeah.
And it is the moment that you remove that dubbing, you're not distracted by the fact that, because some of the ones you go, oh, they've got really good actors who are really adding character to it. And then others, you go, this obviously is, we've got 6 hours and we need to get through this whole thing as fast as possible.
You're also not reminded of all the comedy sketches we saw on TV in the 70s, where the two Ronnies or whatever parodied the dubbing of Italian westerns. So, it's good to try and put some distance between you and it. But this is a pretty interesting collection because it's, the Euro Western, as a film buff would call it, sort of goes from the early 60s to the late 70s. There's about 600 or more of them made, particularly for the Italian market, where people in Italy, it seems in the 60s, the Italian working class went to the cinema every night, and you see that in Cinema Paradiso, what a part of everyone's life it was. And these things got knocked out, and once something was a success, it would be massively copied by things with similar names. Often the names were changed to be similar to the thing that had been a hit. And so there was these sort of factories turning out these films, and yet a lot of the people making them, although they were in they were required to produce this product. They had artistic ambitions or they had political agendas or whatever. So it's a great thing that I really relate to as a stand-up, which is you're basically in genre. You're in a genre, and the genre has rules, and you're obliged to be some entertainment for people. Primarily, you're not art, you're entertainment. But it's like, how much art can you get into it, and yet it's still entertainment? That to me is the challenge, and that's what's going on in a lot of these films. Not all of them. I've seen probably about 300 or 400, and about a third of them are no, they're not worth ever even thinking about again. But the great ones are brilliant.
Yeah. But that's what interests me is when you say that thing about art, is watching these reminded me that a lot of British cinema is very straight in terms of its narrative.
Yeah.
Whereas these will suddenly have a moment of strange comedy or absurdism or something which is almost a kind of moment of psychedelia.
Yeah.
In the middle of what, until that point, you've gone, oh, this is just a well-shot horse chase, and what the hell is happening now?
That's what I love.
And why have they? And that's the bit that, because I wondered when you were growing up, like most of the westerns that we had, I think were probably Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne westerns, and I don't, even the ones where people go, you've got to love John Ford. And I try, it's just not my, but these
were like punk rock, weren't they, to us. And then in the late 80s, Alex Cox, who was obviously really influenced by these sorts of films, he used to have a thing on BBC Two called Movie Drone, where he would introduce films he liked. And he started to get some of the slightly less well-known ones in, like Face to Face and A Bullet for the General. I remember seeing, and Leone's Duck You Sucker, which is better known as Fistful of Dynamite, which is out now in a much better, longer cut actually. But yeah, he was enthusiastic about them and didn't think they were a ridiculous joke. And you'd see these things, and then of course you'd never hear them again, because we're talking about the pre-DVD era. You'd start to think you'd imagined them, like so many cultural things from our childhood. You'd think you'd imagined them, but that's why it's great having these. I mean, I know physical media is out of fashion, but this proves that these exist.
But also, it's not out of fashion for old men like you and me. This is exactly what old men want. They want far too many extras. Yeah. They want as much extraneous detail, and then they want occasionally to meet other people and express their love for it, while those other people go, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. I've never heard of these things. Yeah. I mean, this is what I find, that difference between the kind of one of the things in all of these is the incredible bleakness and sadism. Yeah. And it's all to different levels in each one of these films. And I kept thinking, like, in most modern hero films or anti-hero films, the moment of victory is you're going to get the dopamine hit, and oh, good. Whereas with these, the moment of victory, even that as a viewer, I kind of feel a resigned, oh, good, he has killed everyone.
Well, I wonder whether that's because a lot of the people working on these films had lived through a Europe that was destroyed by the Second World War, and they'd lived through the struggles of partisans, and they'd seen that Nazis could be as bad as communists, and they'd seen value systems destroyed and the landscapes that they lived in destroyed in a way that, although Britain suffered the Blitz and whatever, and we lost a lot of people in combat, our actual homeland wasn't destroyed in that same way. And I think that there's a sort of nihilism in them that might seem comical, or over the top. But actually, I think in a lot of ways it is a genuine response to the sort of trauma of World War II. And if we go through in chronological order the four that are in this box, the first one is a really good place to start for what you're talking about. And the first one, all these westerns are themed around vengeance, and Massacre Time.
That's the great thing, isn't it? That the names are Massacre Time is probably the.
Well, it was retitled The Brute and the Beast but Massacre Time is great. But this in this is
The Brute and the Beast doesn't really work as a title.
It doesn't work,
does it? No.
But it's exactly what you say. Like this is about a guy. He comes home to find that his family no longer have their home, that his brother and who he thinks is his mother are living in poverty, and that the town's been taken over by these people, and he wants to try and get the equilibrium back. It's another film that has a relationship with the Ulysses plot, of Ulysses coming back to Ithaca. The best of those is the best is Return of Ringo by Sassari from about 3 years previously, which is just a fantastic Ulysses type western. But
I should mention two things. One, that it's Lucio Fulci, who in the UK would definitely be really known as a horror movie director, but at this point he'd been mainly known as a comedy director.
Yeah, comedy double act.
Then the couple of westerns. How many westerns did he do?
He did about 3, I think. 3, but this was his first one.
And this one does start off. It does have a kind of horror movie feel because it starts off like the most dangerous game. In fact, this is the thing that I found quite interesting. As you watch, it's basically got some very posh people in various different silky garb racing on horses to kill a peasant who's been kept in a cage.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems very political. You know, there's a lot of symbolism about class and power, and there's a point in it where Tom, the brother who's trying to get the land back, is repeatedly whipped in the courtyard of this wealthy people's party during a rich people's party, and he gets blood all over him, and he falls into their table, and his peasant blood goes on the white. So then he gets up and he staggers out of the party and touches these people, and his blood goes all over
silky
their white clothes.
And in fact, that's one of the rare ones that in the dubbed version that becomes that is really pertinent because the fact you have got someone going, oh, he's a karma, and he's touched my, and it is quite funny the way that because it becomes so heightened.
Yeah,
but that's such an interesting way to start it because I don't think you would even necessarily know you were in for a western.
I mean, it starts with the crazy son of Junior.
Which is a great performance. That actor was also in a very different film, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Which is, but he's a proper, really twisted, psychotic.
Yeah.
There's no sudden reveal of that right from the start. Slightly twitchy.
Well, he releases a peasant to hunt for his own amusement, which also happens in Django. It happens in quite a lot of these films that rich people release peasants to hunt for fun. It's a very heavy-handed metaphor, Marxist revisionism of history. And they chase this guy into a river, and he's killed in a river by dogs. Then, this is really interesting. Often the title sequences in these films look like attempts to lend meaning to them. Maybe retroactively. They thought we need some... And the title song, we flow down river. And flowing down river takes us to where the disinherited son, Tom, is panning for gold. And as if he's connected inevitably by the sort of flow of nature to these events. And then he's called home because something's happened, and he goes back to the house is actually the house that was his that has been taken by these bad people, the Scott family, is in a lot of these films. The same locations and the same extras crop up over and over again. So when you watch hundreds of Italian westerns, it gets very disorientating. The house is Villa Mussolini, which was Mussolini's summer house where he went horse riding. And it's also in And God Said to Cain. It's in 2 of the films. You see 2 of the films are set in the same building, which is really weird. And he goes back. This sort of ties him into this flow of inevitability of history. And then the other thing, you get all these archetypal sort of characters turning up, and I think a lot of why these films seem weird to us is because they're one of the set of rules they're playing by is a kind of commedia dell'arte rules. You know, there's often people that have seen the Dollars films will know there's always some gravedigger or local character who's kind of a fixer but also an observer and comments on what's going on and has no real value system, but the dead bodies are useful to him. And particularly, that's a really good character in Return of Ringo, which is an Arrow as well. The gravedigger's brilliant, and the gravedigger here is an old Chinese guy in it, sort of.
Which is very filled with. He's kind of he's a bit of a shyster.
Yeah.
He's always got a little plan. He's always got a way of making money, and he's always justifying it via Confucius.
Yeah.
Or he's basically saying Confucius says, but in this town I need $20. And it is a really good comedy in fact, this one I watched both versions dubbed, and the person they get to dub it has really good. It's a really kind of
almost certainly Burt Kwok.
No, it's not. It's not Burt Kwok. That to me is still one of the amazing things, which is because Burt Kwok did do the water margin.
Yeah.
But I had not realised until I watched Monkey. You remember Monkey? Again.
Yeah.
That was all dubbed by English actors,
right,
pretending to, and it's like that bit where you go, this doesn't sit well now. It's
Yeah.
really, I'm not even going to do the impression. I would, but we can't take those kind of risks if it's taken out of context and put on YouTube. But it is, that character is a fantastic, but the grotesque nature of it as well, of this film, it is, I mean, one of the things that, I was thinking of John Carpenter, because of course John Carpenter's hugely influenced by Westerns and Rio Bravo. And in Assault on Precinct 13, I think that has one of the most shocking deaths of all time, which is the girl going to get, but I asked for double vanilla, and someone just turns a gun and shoots her, and it's, I think you've seen it.
Yeah.
And in this film as well, there's a scene, you don't see the murder, but he goes outside the Carradine house, which he's visiting. The guy he's trying to talk to is shot. He goes back in the house, and there are 2 dead children and the mother. At that time, I mean, you can see, in fact, why that wouldn't have been able to play in a UK cinema at the point. It's an incredibly bleak image. There's 3 open-eyed of the whole family dead.
And that this film also ends in a way that that comes back to what you were talking about. Is there seems to be an inevitability about the fact that they have to take revenge. There's a scene where the drunken brother, who's played by George Hilton, Jeff, who's a Uruguayan actor who's in loads of these films. He reluctantly and with a heavy heart gets his guns out, having, obviously we're not sure what happened. We're not even sure what happened in the past, but he's gone into alcoholism and he's not wearing them. He puts his guns back on and reluctantly goes off with his brother to take vengeance. And you see this thing, you know, it's in the John Wick films. You know, he digs up his stuff's buried in the cellar and he gets it out. It's in Unforgiven, taking on the weapons again. But when they do kill all the baddies, they're not sort of triumphant about it. It looks like it's done sort of methodically, as if it has to be done. And I'll be interested in the difference between the dub and the subtitled Italian version, because the alcoholic brother character, he keeps saying, as he shoots these people in the closing sequence, he's going, "Thank you, gentlemen. Here you are, gentlemen." And it's difficult to know from the subtitles what the sort of emotional emphasis on that line is when it's said. But I know that in the dub, in the British English language dub, it's quite sort of cheery and flippant. And yet there seems to be a sadness about the fact that fate forces them to take revenge, kind of like that thing you get in Albania, where the vengeance debt is passed on for generations and generations and never ends. There's something sort of awful about it as well.
But he's a fantastic, I mean, that performance is a fantastic performance, because he is this very flamboyant drunk who has also realised that the world is utterly pointless. So that scene where you first see him, where a bunch of people think we'll be able to bully him because he's pissed out of his head, and then still manages to crush everyone in the bar, that is a real bravura performance. And he's not the, in many ways you think that for not the lead character.
Well, if people do need to see an Italian Western in which a drunk man becomes the hero, there's at least half a dozen of those that they can check out. And I wish I could remember the name of the alcoholic sheriff.
But quite often they'll go, "I'm going to put the bottle away," whereas he goes, "I'm going to drink it a little bit more," and go, and he's
it's like
and then even
Popeye's spinach.
when he's killed everyone, and then he goes, "Oh, there's the cocktail cabinet. I'll just have another drink." And there's kind of, but that was the other thing as well, which I think again feels more like some of the elements of Fulci, which are that kind of that sadism and grotesque side, as well as that whipping scene, which is a very odd scene as well, because when you find out, I don't know if we should spoil it. It doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah.
We'll spoil it anyway.
Spoil everything.
But yeah, we should. I mean, that's what a lot of, I think, both our careers have been about, trying to spoil people's joy. And why should this change? But it is the bit where you go, when it turns out that the hero, actually it's his dad, who's Scott, who's the person who's kind of a bad guy, but is more like he's just a bit lame.
He's gets forced to go along with it.
He doesn't even tell his son off when he just kills someone. He doesn't say you shouldn't do that. He goes, "Oh dear." But the strange thing of during the whipping scene, at no point does Scott go, "Hey, why don't you stop? I've got something to tell you." For some, that's the bit that I love about these films is logically the story doesn't quite work.
Well, it's interesting you should bring that up, because Alex Cox is really good on that. And he thinks it goes back to Dashiell Hammett stories and to Yojimbo, the Kurosawa, proto-Western, proto-spaghetti Western, and back to, if you go back far enough, to The Servant of Two Masters, which is a Italian play in the 1700s by Goldoni. Right? There's all those plot lines have a sort of strange bit about 2/3 in, where things could resolve, and yet the protagonist seems to sort of not finish things off. Alex Cox wonders if it's to do with Hamlet, with the prevarication of that sort of the philosopher hero who can't quite bring things to a close for some reason. But that's in a lot of these films. There seems to be a bit where you think it's sort of done now, and then he just gets really beaten up again and has to start from scratch again. It seems to be something about the rhythm of them that I expect. I think these sustain. I think these are interesting enough films to have these ideas put on them, and I wonder if way back in human consciousness there's some story where that happens, where things aren't resolved and it has to be built up again. And is it the basis of all these stories? I don't know.
Yeah, because you always have to. Well, in fact, in 2 of them, I think it's only 2 out of 4 of them, there is that point 2/3 of the way through where the hero must be crushed and bloodied.
Yeah. Oh yeah, normally
and then rise again.
Yeah. In Django and in loads of the Anthony Steffan ones. Anthony Steffan's a great Argentinian nobleman who's in lots of these films, but he's always beaten to a pulp about 2/3 of the way through. Normally in a cellar, sort of left there, and then has to kind of. It happens in
My Name is
Pecos,
Pecos,
which we'll talk about.
Franco Nero part is quite an interesting one because he moves through the film and there are points of action.
Yeah.
And yet it is one of those ones where he's not in lots of the scenes. He's not really the focus. And he's not the exciting thing. And there's also that other side we should talk about, which is the strange incest plot, which is kind of which some people read a lot into.
Yeah.
I think because basically between Scott and the sadistic son, there's a scene with the piano playing where they play the piano together, and some people have read in quite a lot there in terms of Oedipal elements and lots of. And how do you feel about that?
Well, this obviously for the audience at the time, part of what is used to make the son Junior appear bizarre, strange, and sinister is that he seems to have some unresolved sexual relationship with a little assistant of his, a little blonde guy who turns up in another one of these films. Actually, he seems to get a lot of bit parts, that guy, as a man who just shoots someone or whips them and then goes off. There's a beautiful interview with him of 20 minutes long on the extras of one of these films where he just says what a lot of fun he had being that guy for 15 years.
Because in this one, he just kind of vanishes eventually, doesn't he?
Yeah,
it's one of those quite
disappears,
interesting bits where I think in all of them there's a point where a director must say, oh no, I've forgotten to kill everyone because Barry wasn't on set today.
The same guy shoots a bloke in Bandidos who was the man who knew where the money was, and everyone tells him off. And he goes, oh. But so there's that, and then there is a sort of suggestion. There's a suggestion that something had happened between the father and the son, and the sinister son. I don't know. He seems to have some power over him, but again, we're never really told what happened to that family. Something happened to that family whereby the Franco Nero character doesn't know he's the son of Scott. We don't know what happened to the mother. We don't know. Something awful happened that is never really even explained. And it's funny that you can sort of watch these things and you often don't really care. It doesn't seem to be what's important about them. What's important is the mood, the atmosphere, the music, the sort of the style of them, and you just kind of get carried along. And if you're watching these and wanting it all to tie together like an episode of Morse, it's just not going to do that.
No,
you're going to be really disappointed.
With the screenwriters, is whether they are going. Well, I mean, obviously we know what's happened to the mother or the son or whatever, but I don't get that sense. I don't get as you said. As long as there's enough for the cause of the action, the cause of the pain, for the emotional anxiety.
Yeah. Well, actually, you're right. They're sort of driven. They're driven often by emotions rather than logic. And again, maybe it's a thing maybe it's a Mediterranean thing that the British mind can't quite cope with, you know.
But I did find that when you watch the first one, I think I watched Bandidos first, and then once you've done the first one, you just go, oh yeah, throw aside all of the other expectations of what a story might be,
Yeah.
you know, meant to do. There's also briefly, I know it's not in this set, but you lent me last night, and I found it fascinating. Fulci's last Western,
Yeah.
which really does feel like it's you can see how he then goes on to. I mean, he had done horror as well. He did Don't Torture a Duckling, which hopefully we'll talk about another time, because it's one of the great. I mean, that's another thing. I don't know how often. I think originally it was called Don't Torture Donald Duck, and then very quickly Disney got in contact and said, nope, you won't be calling it that. And we'll talk about that another time. But Fall for the Apocalypse is a really fascinating film.
For the Apocalypse, yeah. It's like a science fiction film almost. And these four people are wandering about in this apocalyptic landscape, being tracked down by this sort of psychotic bandit. And
it's such an interesting start, because it's basically a town trying to clean itself up. You've got four criminal archetypes. You've got the poker cheat. You've got pregnant prostitute. You've got an alcoholic, and you've got a man who basically sees dead people and is clearly.
This depicts a valueless society full of corruption, in which it seems to be down to the individual to chart their own path through it. And increasingly, that's how I feel this world is. And because these are often based on very ancient stories or on archetypes.
Thanks very much for watching. Thank you very much for supporting our friend through their health battles. And as I mentioned before as well, you can also support all our other projects at patreon.com/Cosmic Shambles. Part 2 of our Italian Western conversation will be appearing very soon.